Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Wednesday, October 10th. There it is. Good morning, Frog. How you doing? Wednesday, October 10th, 2018. Believe me, I do all the very important voice exercises before getting on the air, like eating breakfast and hustling the kids out the door. And that's supposed to clear your throat, but apparently it never works. I guess I'm just going to have to spend, maybe I should be gargling with salt water or something. What do they used to do in the cartoons? The opera singers used to spray their throats with something that looked like a perfume bottle, which I assume was not perfume because no one cares how your voice smells, I guess. But I was never really into that stuff. I don't know. I got to get a hold of something to make this problem go away. Plenty to cover today. Greg Dworkin already floating that raft of stories down the Skype stream, if you will. Merrily, I guess. That's usually the way people float things down streams. And Joan McCarter slated to join us later on today, unless emergency, but I don't think we have any emergencies today. There are, of course, various emergency level or extinction level events happening in the Senate today. Some key votes on terrible legislation, about which the morning Twitter wires are abuzz because the president has wangled a way for himself, or rather for his staffers, more likely, to lie outrageously about their health care plans in the pages of USA Today, which apparently doesn't employ anyone who can either say no or simply try and straighten out some of the inaccuracies or prepare a sidebar for explaining exactly what this piece of propaganda is. Everybody's upset, and, well, par for the course there. In addition, many other stories of the White House propaganda machine putting out all sorts of nonsense and bamboozling the rest of the both sides or press into believing that there are left-wing liberal mobs roaming the country getting ready to attack and kill politicians, probably of all stripes. Meanwhile, of course, it's exactly the opposite. Lots of waves being created yesterday and today by the comments from Rand Paul, and I don't know exactly what the context was of this article, but apparently some reporting that Rand Paul fears violence from liberals. His wife sleeps with a gun next to the bed, which is ordinarily not a very good idea. Don't know whether I should give a pass to Rand Paul or anything on the off chance that they take someone, whether it's his wife or anyone else, takes him out. We hope for better outcomes than that in all situations, and it's never really fun to wish that there's, that harm comes to someone. Although there are a few people that are on my list that I do think I'd be tempted, let's say, to consider whether or not we'd all be better off if, let's say, an injury or a mild sprain perhaps, took them out of action for a week or two at a time. We consider these things from time to time, but then we think better of it. It's true that of all the worrywart Republican politicians out there to carry this message about this fear of attack, although it is awfully stupid to actually come out and say, I fear attacks by liberals. What happened to MS-13? I thought that's what we were supposed to be afraid of. Of all the folks who could carry this message, I suppose Rand Paul has somewhat more legitimate a claim to worrying about at least random violence, given that his neighbor, whether that neighbor is a liberal or not, flipped out about a property dispute and tackled him and broke his ribs. And I see some conservative columnist or another insisting that he was also, was he at the baseball game practice where they had the shooting. Is that what they're referring to, that Steve Scalise was shot in? And apparently, I mean, did we mention this yesterday? Perhaps not. Perhaps it only came out after the show. But he's the much passed around one-liner was from a tweet from The Hill, which summed the story up here. Rand Paul, I'm worried that, quote, someone is going to be killed because of the political climate. Of course, I saw many people out there reminding him, yeah, well, people already have been killed because of the political climate, and many of them have been the liberals that you're worried about attacking you, having been killed by the arch conservatives who stand by your side. For instance, Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, and a number of other examples as well. But a conservative columnist about whom I know nothing, Bethany Mandel, points out everyone dunking on him for this recalls that he had his ribs broken by his neighbor and was shot at last year in an attempted mass shooting. Right? Do I remember it? I do. Does he remember anybody else's pain or the violence that befell others? And considerably worse at that. And the answer is apparently not. And so, I don't know. I guess until you recognize that you've stuck your foot in your mouth about this and you're worried that someone is going to be killed, that implicitly ignores those who have been killed. Well, I can't really think that you're super woke or anything. That's not something that's likely to happen, but others are insisting that this now be the standard. Well, I reject it if that's the case. Other interesting things happening today. Well, the Hurricane Michael, bearing down on the south, and it looks like it's got this weird path of coming, around Florida and crossing it from west to east and then heading up the east coast, if I saw that track right. That doesn't look like a lot of fun, and it will create an awful lot of problems all across northern Florida and the Panhandle. Greg Dworkin, ready to join us with his raft of stories, as previously mentioned. And I imagine many of them are the same as those which we had on tap in the emergency event that he was, I don't know, that you overslept, Greg. I think we have the same taste in stories.
What a great idea. I should really try that.
You should give that a shot. How about Friday for that?
Okay, we can do that. We can try that.
Excellent. I need you when we have you. I need you.
Yeah, right. I'll be here tomorrow, but maybe I'll try oversleeping on Friday.
Yeah,
it's a great idea.
It's
an idea whose time is coming.
That's right. Not yet, because today's Wednesday.
Not quite yet, but soon enough. So in the pundit roundup today, I led off with some of the rumor mongering. Apparently, if somebody says something on Fox and Friends, Trump immediately picks up and tweets it.
Yes.
And I feel like this is a bit of a deja vu. I think we've done this before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in this particular case, what happened is somebody tweeted about George Soros paying the protesters, particularly the ones who were in the elevator up in Jeff Flake's face.
Yes, of course.
And Trump got the idea that they're being paid by George Soros.
What?
Protesters who confronted a senator in an elevator were, quote, paid for by Soros and others, unquote,
sure.
President Trump tweeted.
Right.
In a reference to Hungarian-born American Jewish billionaire and liberal philanthropist George Soros. Harold Pollack points out Soros survived the Nazis and Soviet communism to become a self-made billionaire and generous advocate for human rights. His emergence as a totemic hate object on the right just sickens me, and there's more than a tinge of anti-Semitism to it.
Yes. There are some who claim not to see it, professionally claim not to see it.
Sure, some people don't see racism, right?
Right.
They're totally colorblind because racism doesn't exist.
Right.
Which means basically you're either really dumb or you're lying. So you mentioned Bethany Mandel. What did she write? What did she take on? What issue?
She was taking on the people reminding. Perhaps you saw the Hill's headline and tweet about Rand Paul worrying that the current climate would perhaps lead to someone being killed, and
like Heather Heyer. Yeah, right.
Yes.
I saw all that.
Yes, and people were reminding him of all the people who had been killed, and her take on it was, all of you people dunking on him with this, realize, of course, that he has more reason to be afraid than, as she put it, the rest of you yokels, because his neighbor got in a property dispute with him and tackled him at one point. And was he at the shooting at the baseball practice?
He well could have been. I sort of have a feeling he was, but I don't know that for a fact.
She seemed to be implying that was the case. I don't remember offhand.
Okay, yeah, I was just trying to get an idea of the background and context.
That's because he wasn't killed there.
Bethany Mandel is a reasonably hard right columnist.
Okay.
Married to Seth Mandel, who writes for the New York Post. Seth Mandel is a never Trumper and a I didn't want Kavanaugh conservative, who nonetheless was outraged about Democrats being outraged. But Bethany tends to be even more hard-edged and hard right. Their particular issue tends to be Israel. But, I'm just trying to get an idea of where they were coming from there. And what's interesting to me is that the other news from yesterday, which I think was kind of a big deal. Yes.
You think so?
I'm just trying to mute between rings here.
Okay. It didn't work.
Yeah, it didn't work. So is Nikki Haley.
Hello.
And her stepping down.
Okay. Yes.
And Mandel and David French and a lot of the traditional conservatives are really super Noah Rothman are really super unhappy about Nikki Haley stepping down for a variety of reasons. They are totally in that school, in that wing of we like her foreign policy, which is to really hate Palestinians and hate Iran.
Yes, right. Love that.
But otherwise be what conservatives consider to be reasonable moderates. Haley is far from a moderate. She's a Tea Party person. But compared to the Nazis in the White House, she was the moderate one.
Thank God for the Nazis.
So, it's interesting reading the conservative columnists just to get their takes on that. And they're really super unhappy with Haley leaving and worried that, what's his name?
What is his name?
John Bolton.
Oh, yes.
Is ascendant. And, the question is, Haley's a politician. She was governor of South Carolina. And is she leaving because the timing is right and she's very good on timing because that's her job? She's a politician. So was it politics or is it policy? Because, like, John Bolton wants to nuke Iran and she didn't want to have any part of it.
Yeah, any number of possible explanations, also including her possible ethical questions.
Just small compared to the rest of them.
Yeah.
And she still has good standing with Trump, so it's probably not that. But everybody who's looking at the situation says this doesn't smell right. There's something else going on here. We just don't know what it is yet.
Right. Also, I suppose others have theorized that it may be the assassination of Khashoggi, or the probable assassination. Anyway.
Yeah, well, that'd be nice, but I don't think it's that.
Yeah, and
the other explanation is that, look, after the election, what happens is that Jeff Sessions is fired.
Yeah.
And Lindsey Graham becomes Attorney General. Mm-hmm. And that opens up a Senate slot. And then Nikki Haley gets appointed.
That is a possibility, too. I saw that discussed
but people close to her say she hates the Senate and she doesn't want to be one of 100. She wants to be one of one.
Yeah, that's not, I did see some speculation that's not really her thing. She wouldn't feel comfortable just sitting there languishing in the Senate.
It's a backbencher. But the whole thing is that, none of it makes sense. And so I think there's a whole lot more story to come out on that.
I would think you are correct. Most people, the least troubling explanation was she didn't want to do the normal thing where you resign after the midterm elections and, more or less in disgrace because they've been wiped out in the elections. She's just setting it up for now. To leave afterwards.
That's the politician.
Yeah, right. There you go. So I have nothing to do with these terrible election results. I was already leaving.
Yeah. And then, who replaces her? Probably Dina Powell. Trump likes Rick Grinnell because he's an awful, horrible person, currently ambassador to Germany and getting the Germans pissed off at us as we speak.
The Germans know they're Nazis.
But the other name in the race, which again was so weird, was Ivanka Trump.
Yes.
Which Trump pulled out yesterday because it's illegal. I mean, there's actually a law against the nepotism part of it there.
Yes.
So you can't appoint her.
Okay.
And again, Bethany Mandel's husband, Seth Mandel, was tweeting about that's really too bad because she's so obviously brilliant. And everybody was starting to dunk on him and saying, like, show your work. Where's your evidence? What one thing has she ever done that makes you think she's brilliant?
That is a good question. There was a lot of brilliance going around yesterday. I don't remember who said it.
It's all hidden genius.
Oh, yes, it was, it was Nikki Haley saying that.
Said it about Jared Kushner.
Right.
And the reason it's hidden is because everybody who knows him can't see it.
We are all searching. Best comeback I saw to it yet about his hidden genius was he made over 100 mistakes filling out his financial disclosure form. Mistakes.
Right. So here's a reasonably fair assessment.
He's a genius
of that.
at hiding.
I just think it's a big deal, and that's why I'm looking at that before we go to the other stories of the day. This is from Dan Dresner, who's a foreign policy expert. Assessing Nikki Haley in the Washington Post, what can we infer from the UN ambassador's announced departure? Not a lot.
Oh.
He says, it's a surprise, but the combined assessment of her tenure from these pieces are mixed, to say the least. Haley deserves full marks for getting to tougher sanctions on North Korea and South Sudan through the UN Security Council, despite Chinese and Russian reluctance, so she did that. Diplomats appreciated working with her even if they disagreed with her. Haley managed to represent, there's a quote from Tamkin, Emily Tamkin, BuzzFeed. Haley managed to represent the U.S. at a multilateral institution for an administration that's highly critical of multilateralism. So as a politician, in other words, she was able to convey to different constituencies different ideas. Now, normally in like real world, we call that lying. But in diplomat world, that's actually a plus and not a minus because you don't want to be in everybody's faces all the time about everything. Trump does, which is one of the reasons why it's hard to imagine Haley lasting. He's much more a John Bolton guy, which is in your face. And Dresner goes on to say, it's not to say her tenure was an unalloyed success. Sorry, I think I caught your cold here.
Oh, well, it's the awesome Skype connection.
Yeah, it must be a computer virus. Haley did not always take slights terribly well. She responded to a massive UN General Assembly vote against the U.S. move of its Israeli embassy to Jerusalem by throwing a petty party. When Haley defended the U.S. decision to withdraw from UN Human Rights Council, she claimed in a speech that U.S. human rights groups had sided with China and Russia, which is a repellent thing to say. And like many current and former Trump officials, she still faces an ethics investigation. She was, flying too much at government expense. But that's about the only thing had in common with the rest of the president's foreign policy team. Retained considerable respect in conservative circles. She was respected by diplomats. That's not true for anybody else in the White House. And how was she able to pull it off? She had two traits that made her unusual. She was a professional politician. Okay, so she could send the different messages to different people. And also she was very good with timing, so she could pick the right fight at the right time. She actually had a fight with Larry Kudlow. Haley was talking about Russia sanctions. She said that they're going to come to pass, and then they didn't happen. And Kudlow said that Haley must have been momentarily confused. And Haley responded with all due respect, I don't get confused. And then she actually got an apology from a Trump White House official over that. And that almost never happens as well. So she maneuvered very well. She was very good at the back door, getting along with different factions within the White House. And she leaves not under complete disgrace, which, again, is something extraordinary for the White House group. But as far as her tenure as, UN ambassador, it's just weird because there are conservatives who are just hailing her as just such a wonderful this, that, and everything else. And the actual description is she didn't screw up as much as a lot of the other Trump people did, but really didn't do all that much.
Well, that's true.
That therefore makes her political star in the ascendancy, and maybe she'll run against Trump in 2020. And you go from the actual assessment of what she did to this latest, commentary about her leaving, and you scratch your head and say, the Beltway pundits are like really stupid.
I
She's
guess.
not running against Trump in 2020.
No, that does
I'm not sure that her star is in the ascendancy. Wishful thinking because they have nobody else.
I guess so. And I don't know. I'm not really sure why they would feel that way about her, and to think that she would then use to play this successful exit if it turns out to be
just
one.
Right, thereby showing that she's the political genius we've all been waiting. You scratch your head and say, what are you doing?
I don't know. I especially don't understand how you would turn a successful exit from the Trump camp, I guess you could say, into a primary campaign against Trump in 2 years.
Right, I'm running against Trump. Vote for me. I wasn't fired.
I guess. That one I have a hard time believing. But I'm very curious about what made her leave.
You can find all over the center right, Mandels of the world, the Noah Rothmans of the world. You can find all this stuff about what a wonderful career she had at the UN, representing exactly what we wanted her to do. Basically, all over the Iran sanctions, because they didn't like the Iran sanctions. Yeah. They wanted them done away with. The deal, that is to say, they wanted the deal done away with. They wanted sanctions there. They want war. So they were happy with her because they felt that she represented their faction. But other than that, I don't get it.
All right. Well, I'll be interested to see what happens.
Let's see what other stuff did you brought up. You brought up the Donald Trump USA Today thing. USA Today, Trump writes, as a candidate, I promised that we would protect coverage for patients with pre-existing conditions and create new health care insurance options that would lower premiums. I have kept that promise. And Benji Sarlin points out the White House is backing a lawsuit to end protections for pre-existing conditions led by Republican attorney generals around the country. Trump already backed bills that would weaken pre-existing protections. The new short-term plans the White House is pushing don't cover them, so he's basically lying.
Yes.
And then Dave Weigel points out Trump's USA Today op-ed follows on what Paul Ryan said this week. Republicans have given up running on entitlement reform. They're now running as the party that will save the Great Society from Medicare for All.
Yes, of course. That makes so much sense.
Also known as gaslighting.
Yeah. I am not certain why USA Today thought this was a great idea, other than people.
Well, he's the president,
clicks.
And the president gets to do stuff that nobody else gets a chance to do. Not just Trump.
That is true. When they get something from the press shop and it looks like it's printable, fine, I guess so. And I don't think he had anything to do with writing the thing. That's one of those things you get to do as a politician, put your name on something that's ghostwritten for you. I don't know what else they were going to do with it now that I think about it. But even the strategy that people attributed to them of just being interested in the clicks, I don't know how many clicks that thing really is going to get.
I don't know. But Glenn Kessler had an interesting reaction. The fact checker for the Washington Post tweeted, how can USA Today allow Trump to publish an article with documented falsehoods?
I do not know. But I think they've managed.
Yeah. Anyway, that's in the background. And then, of course, what else is in the background is the whole big response to the Kavanaugh thing. And we have polling that we didn't cover on Monday because it came out after the show. And then polling we have this morning. CNN found a 35-point gender gap. Nearly two-thirds of registered women voters polled by CNN say they were more likely to vote for Democrats this November. 63% for the Democrat compared to 33% for the Republican, whereas with males it was 50 Republican, 45 Democrat. So 30-point gap on the women's side and a 5-point negative gap on the men's side, so that adds up to 35. The CNN poll, conducted from October 4th to October 7th and released Tuesday, shows 54% of likely voters are planning to vote for the Democratic candidate and 41 are backing a Republican. That's a 13-point generic gap there. And Democrats could be enough to overcome gerrymandered districts and allow Democrats to retake the House if it holds. Other things that also came out, there's a new Politico Morning Consult poll. I don't think it's the greatest poll in the world, but everybody in Washington reads it, so it helps that narrative. The poll, Kavanaugh confirmation energizes Democrats more than the GOP. That's completely against everything you've been hearing for the past 3 or 4 days.
It is.
But basically that's because pundits are stupid.
Oh, well, that's the only explanation then.
Since we all said that's not going to happen. A total of 46% say the Senate made the wrong decision, which is really quite interesting. The guy's an illegitimate justice, and he's not going to be felt to be a good decision.
No, I can't imagine that he would be.
Following the GOP-led effort to push through his nomination, enthusiasm among Democratic voters has surged. More than 3 in 4 Democrats, 77%, say they're very motivated to turn out, more than the 68% of Republicans who say that.
Well, that's good. I wonder on what basis did everyone insist that the opposite was true?
Because they're looking at a few Senate races. I think it'll matter in places like Tennessee, where I think Bredesen has a tough time, North Dakota, where Heitkamp has a tough time. Those are the Democrats running. And, new polls out this morning show that McCaskill's still neck and neck with Hawley, and I think that, or Howley, I forget how he pronounces his name. And, the healthcare part of it, I think, is going to be the key factor. And McCaskill may well pull that out. The hurricane is coming to Florida, and aside from the devastation, it's always hard to know how that plays with politics, because Scott gets to be governor and leader, and whether that helps his reelection is unclear. First things first, they got to deal with the hurricane, of course. But the general Senate map doesn't look nearly as favorable as the House. The House for the Democrats is actually looking very good. There's an uptick in the predictions from 538. We're now up to about 78% chance from 73, 74 last week for the Democrats to retake the House. And again, Morning Consult and Politico said the same thing. They have a piece which essentially says the GOP lead in the House is crumbling, is the way they described it. So Kavanaugh didn't help the House at all, but it might have helped the Senate in certain red states, which we've been saying all along. The House and the Senate may be going in different directions just because of the map.
And so that was what was driving. They were not waiting for polling results and just.
Yeah, it's all back to fundamentals.
I don't even know what that's supposed to mean.
You could have skipped the last 3 months and you knew what was going to happen.
Oh, okay. Well, that does seem fundamentally the same as it was then. That's true. Well, we do discover every once in a while you point out the various straight lines we end up looking at on those polling maps. All right. Well, we'll be back in 2 minutes for a little more. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Craig Dworkin is still with me. I've been spending the 2-minute break searching frantically through Pocket. There are 89 different directions to go in, and you've still got 10 to go probably.
Well, I want to finish with that Morning Consult poll because I think it's interesting. Yeah. Here's another snippet from it. A plurality of voters, 44%, said the confirmation process gave them a less favorable view of Kavanaugh, including 36% who said made them much less favorably. And 30% said it made them more favorable. When you step back and look and say, well, the Democrats should have handled this differently, they painted him as somebody who was really unfit, and it worked.
Yes.
In other words, they won the nomination, but they lost the narrative.
Well, okay, that's true. I don't know how much that's worth.
The public sees him as like, this guy doesn't have judicial temperament. I mean, that's that's done. So the Democrats did their job. They just didn't have the votes. And for all they should have done it differently. Oh, it was all this, it was all that. Michael Avenatti should have stayed out of it. Yeah, he should have, but that's not what happened. What happened is Republicans had the votes, and so they pushed it through.
Yes, that's true. It wasn't likely to change by much, if at all, no matter how it was handled.
Right. They lost by 1 vote. 2, maybe, but really 1 because Manchin doesn't count. And then the other part from the Morning Consult poll, Democrats lead the generic congressional ballot by 10 percentage points, 48 to 38, with 14 undecided. Last week, Democrats' lead was slightly smaller, 43 to 36. So they went from 7 to 10 over the week that Kavanaugh was confirmed. So the idea that this is helping Republicans, no.
We should print
Certainly
that.
Not in the House.
No. a couple times, like for several days in a row, and then not print the news about the other part.
Right.
I think that would work.
Okay, and then what CNN said was Democrats could be looking at an elections bump after the bitterly fought battle to confirm Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, a bump propelled by women voters. And then they talk about that huge gap there. The CNN poll conducted from October 4th through 7th shows 54% of likely voters are planning to vote for the Democrat compared to 41, and Democrats had that 13-point advantage, which could be enough to overcome gerrymandered districts, I already mentioned. But there's a third poll, which is only a hint of one. It was looking at Colorado, but they mentioned the Kaiser Foundation health poll was looking at Colorado and saw that in Colorado, the Democrats are far more motivated than the Republicans are. And then they have numbers there, but then they said, and we also found for the country that was also true, but they didn't give any numbers.
Oh.
So those are 2.5 or 3 polls then that are showing that actually the people who have been motivated by the whole Kavanaugh debacle are Democrats.
Wow, that seems like it would have been easy to guess correctly.
Well, we did, didn't we?
Well, oh yeah, you did, but the big famous people didn't.
Well, both sides.
Yeah, so something like that. Okay.
So that's what happens, right? So you go on TV and to analyze how these polls are affecting Democrats and Republicans, let's get 3 Republicans.
That's basically, what would have cured that? This looked like a job for snap polling, which they never did bring back because it kept proving all their pundits wrong in real time.
that really made them look bad, didn't it?
Yeah, no wonder that hasn't come back. But why not? That's what they should be doing during these panel shows, and let the pundits give their analysis and say, no, this is going to help Republicans in a huge way. Oh, our viewers in real time say overwhelmingly the exact opposite. That's weird.
Yeah, making us look really bad, so we don't want that anymore.
Yeah, well, okay, that's what happened to that.
Other things in the new Kaiser poll, 75% of Americans want to keep the Affordable Care Act protections for pre-existing conditions that the GOP lawsuit seeks to overturn.
Yes.
That's kind of important. So, again, Republicans are going to run on Kavanaugh. The Democrats are going to shrug and say, okay, but it doesn't help you to do that. And besides, healthcare. And healthcare is going to be the closing argument. It'll be in Missouri. You'll see that with McCaskill, and you'll see that with other Democrats as well. And so, we'll see what happens. So that's basically my roundup for today.
Okay.
It's important to vote. The other thing that Kaiser had pointed out is in their polling, younger people tend to be a little bit more motivated than we had previously thought. And, of course, we have the Taylor Swift effect with 65,000 new registrations the day after she asked people to do that. And whether, some people say that, oh, well, that's because as the deadline comes, everybody signs up at the last minute. This is true.
Yes.
But Vote.org, who's tracking it, say this is an unprecedented bump, so there really is a Taylor Swift effect.
Okay.
And Rihanna did the same thing and told her fans to go ahead and register and vote, and hopefully that's how you bring younger people in. I think that they're more responsive to Taylor Swift and Rihanna than they are to say, oh, I don't know, Mike Bloomberg.
That's probably true. And,
who's announcing that he's going to be a Democrat again, and then maybe he'll run for president in 2020, which I think is great news for Andrew Cuomo, right?
I guess so. It can't be good news for John McCain anymore.
Well, Andrew Cuomo is probably the only one who's paying attention to Mike Bloomberg.
I guess so. Is Pataki going to get back in?
Yeah, but he's the other party.
For now, who knows? Maybe he's a never-Trumper who's going to become a born-again Democrat.
He could be Jeff Flake's running mate.
Yeah. Well, it could happen.
By the way, did you see the new Jeff Flake? Mitt Romney I guess he was in a debate in Utah with whoever he's running against, and said, it was a terrible thing that we had all those baby jails on the border.
Oh, well, that's nice of him to do. Where he's going to put them in binders instead.
So he's going to be the new Jeff Flake. He'll say this is terrible, and then he'll go ahead and vote with his party. There
has to be one of them at all times, I think, or else, I don't know, something happens, it's weird, Mordor takes over. I'm not certain exactly what they're protecting us from, but there's got to be a Jeff Flake sometime.
I'm not actually sure what Sauron's position is on healthcare, but I don't think it's good.
All right, well, something for all. It's just not Medicare.
On the other hand, I do have to say one thing about Sauron in his favor. He is really into pre-existing conditions.
Oh, okay. I can believe it.
Right. Because his position is that this has been true for all of eternity, so we're not just going to ignore that.
Yes. Plus, there's the great eye care plan, so that's good. They don't often cover that.
Yeah, but it only covers one eye.
We split it down the middle. You got to pay for the other eye. You got to pull your own weight in this. It's not socialism, you know.
Yeah, we'll do that eye, but the other eye, you're on your own. Okay, well, that's it for me.
One eye to
Lord
rule
of the
them
Rings references, and I will be back tomorrow, and maybe we'll do the other eye.
Could be. All right. Well, very good. Thanks very much for the roundup. As it turns out, there's other things happening as well. These are all the important ones.
Yeah, okay. Well, Joan will cover those.
Right. The other eye.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Alrighty.
Thanks very much, Greg. We'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, remember, there's no I
with
in
one
Daily
eye.
Coast.
There's one now.
Oh, there's one. One
right.
big one. Okay.
Okay.
Hanging over everything in a cloud.
enough of this.
We'll just see how far we can push this. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
You can't stop. Okay. Force of Hobbit, you might say. Oh. All right. I just poked myself in the one remaining eye. Thanks, Greg. And let's get on with it here. I have a million different things that we could do today, and we'll do 2 or possibly 3 of them. That's, how the show goes. Here's something I wanted to share with you. Part of, I guess, the Kavanaugh thing again. We just can't get away from that story. But one of our favorite tweeterers, right? That's a word, isn't it? Southpaw, NYC Southpaw has pointed this out. I remember this story that he's reading here, and I guess it's from back in 2015, a Politico magazine story, and he tweets for us that it just happened on this paragraph, looking at a Politico article from a couple years back about the Senate's sexist history. Do you remember this article? We may even have read it or referred to it on the air. I'm certain that we must have referred to it at least. The Secret History of Women in the Senate is the name of the article. Liza Mundy wrote this for the Politico magazine. The publication date that they give for it is January/February 2015. Were we doing that as a bi-monthly thing? All right. It was this story. The lead story from this article will be the one that rings a bell for you, I think. Kay Hagan just wanted to swim. You remember this? It was late 2008, and the Democrat was newly arrived on Capitol Hill as North Carolina's junior senator-elect. But Hagan was told that the Senate swimming pool was males only. Do you remember this story? She wanted to swim a couple of laps. No, you can't because it's men only. How could that be the case? Why would it be the case? And the answer was because some of the male senators liked to swim naked. Do you remember that story? Do you wish you didn't remember that story? I do. I remember. Well, I do to both. I remember it, and I wish I didn't. But there were, I guess, some. We pondered this at the time, and apparently it was the case that in olden days, and there are a lot of people from the olden days in the Senate. That's where you go. When you're, if not Florida, you go to the United States Senate. And I guess they, in the olden days, did swim that way. That was the preferred, I don't know who preferred it, but I guess the gym teachers. And you should be looking into those people. They're long dead, but perhaps you should have a look at them along with, any number of other institutions now coming under suspicion for the way they treated kids those days. But they used to teach kids to swim naked, which I don't know what to make of that. I think, there's no place for it now in our society, but I imagine way back when they said, it probably works best if you are, although it doesn't, perhaps it's not a feeling you look forward to, going to gym class and swimming naked in front of everybody. But apparently there were some people old enough to continue that tradition, even though bathing suits had been invented during their lifetimes. And some of them were even more ridiculous than you might have imagined. Back in the day, if you went to the beach, they didn't let you swim naked. But where they could block off the swimming pools, I guess they did that. Anyway, it was a crazy story. And it was a real eye-opener. As much as you'd like to squeeze your eyes shut, one or both of your eyes shut if you're Sauron, it really was an eye-opener. And the stories go on. There are more and more of them, but that was the killer story to lead it all off. Anyway, it's chock full of stories from other women who have served in or still were serving in the Senate and running into ridiculous sexism in various aspects of the way the Senate worked. And there were some other crazy ones in here. And the one that Southpaw seized on has two important pieces in it. The beginning piece, which comes from Patty Murray, and then the end piece. And here's what he's got. And I think I want you to think about this in the context, strictly in the context of the Kavanaugh debacle, how it went down, and who did what with their votes and why. And this is the clip that NYC Southpaw pulls. Even in the not so recent past, this was not merely a matter of making women feel excluded. Some of what the female senators have experienced bordered on sexual harassment or the threat of it. And even this is problematic because here it is 2015. That's not that long ago. How do you follow up the teaser here that it borders on sexual harassment or the threat of it? Immediately following that sentence, in one infamous 1993 episode, and it is linked in the body of the article, we could take a look at that episode, the late South Carolina Republican Strom Thurmond, apparently by all accounts something of a sex maniac, even during his days in the Senate, but wow. And by the way, it's too cutesy a term. He was a serial sexual assaulter, is what was happening here, which is this does not border on sexual harassment. In one infamous 1993 episode, the late South Carolina Republican Strom Thurmond tried to fondle Washington Democrat Patty Murray's breast on the Senate elevator. Another senator, a woman senator, he's sexually molesting. And I don't know how that borders on sexual harassment. If you try to fondle somebody's breasts in the elevator, that's bordering on sex. That's a sexual assault. But hey, whatever. Even in 2015, we were puzzling over whether or not to call it sexual harassment or the threat of it. And astonishing. I mean, it's almost like you've this is the atmosphere that this article describes, is that it would almost be expected. Like, oh, well, the dirty old man senator, and he got on the elevator, and a page or a staffer or an intern or whoever got on the elevator with him, and he tried to fondle them in the elevator. And you say, well, dirty old man senator thinks he can get away with it with a staffer. He's stupid. He's wrong. He's living in the past, and was even an idiot in the past. They would have said, you're a dirty old man and we can't stand it. But to do it to another senator, I mean, I suppose there's the possibility he was so old he may have had no idea that there even were women senators, and it might not have occurred to him that he was attacking a senator. But there it was. I don't even know what to. I'm not sure what I'm so astonished, or I should be more astonished at this or the following story. But it continues on. So notoriously predatory was Thurmond that we did nothing about it. That when Susan Collins came to the Senate in 1993, in 1997, I may have said 1993 there, she was warned to avoid getting on an elevator alone with him. In other words, one of the first things that happens, you get there and they say, all right, you're a Republican senator. Don't get on an elevator alone with Strom Thurmond. He will sexually assault you. Are you kidding? I'm a senator. He would never try that on another senator. She may have thought, well, don't be so sure. Patty Murray is a senator, and he did it to her 4 years ago, and we have done nothing about it since. There's been no ethics complaints, no ethics committee. You could not get away. I don't think you could get away without an ethics committee inquiry on this now. But this is, again, not long ago. This is the 1990s. It's after our year of the woman elections following the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas hearings, the whole thing. But Susan Collins comes to the Senate in 1997. She's warned, don't get on an elevator alone with him. It goes on to explain to us, for those of you who don't know. A Republican from Maine, Collins describes publicly, for the first time, being headed for the senator's only elevator and seeing Thurmond walking in the same direction. She did a U-turn and took the stairs. Now, that's a good idea, right? Now, you might, in the aftermath of the Kavanaugh hearing, say, how do you, are you sure you made a U-turn and took the stairs? What's your corroborating evidence? Maybe you thought you saw Strom Thurmond, but you really saw someone who looked exactly like him. Are you sure it wasn't a case of mistaken identity? Well, don't worry about that. She is positive that it was Strom Thurmond, and she's positive that she made a U-turn and went down the stairs. And here's the reason she knows. The reason I remember, this is the quote, the reason I remember the incident so well is because it was observed by one of my Republican male colleagues, recalls Collins. He, quote, started laughing because he knew exactly why I was turning around and not getting on the elevator. Isn't that interesting? In other words, first off, I guess we can say, it is pointed out by NYC Southpaw immediately afterwards. Senator Collins remembered the incident in detail because of the laughter, which is, of course, exactly why Christine Blasey Ford was so certain that she recalled her assault so clearly, even though she didn't remember how exactly she got to the house, who might have driven her home, and whether or not there were any other people that she may or may not have known, and this and that, all the various other details. The one thing that stuck with her was, A, that she had been attacked, and B, that there was this laughter. That stuck in her mind, as unfortunately, as ridiculously as she put it, indelibly, why don't you say indelible on the hippocampus? That was a surefire common man phrase there. But what stuck in her mind was the laughter. What stuck in Senator Collins' mind was the laughter. She remembers it in detail because of the laughter. And there's a whole other story that goes along with the laughter from all the excellent writing we had available to us in the last week or two about how a lot of this stuff is just performative for other men more so than about actually seeking sexual gratification without any even attempt at consent from women. It's really more about what the other men see and think of you when they see you doing this stuff. That's why the laughter was so important. And here, too, who is this unnamed senator who laughed? Senator Collins. I guess without a name, it's just uncorroborated testimony. It made me very mad. It probably made you very mad. And I got to say, this was an interesting thing. I retweeted that, and I retweeted Southpaw's observation. Actually, I only retweeted this observation. Senator Collins remembered the incident in detail because of the laughter. I wanted people to go and read that clip by itself and to be enticed into it by this otherwise cryptic line. And it made me very mad. I thought, my first reaction was, I want to retweet this clip from the Politico magazine here with a F.U. Susan Collins on it. But then I thought, all right, well, perhaps that's not the language I want to go with. Maybe something, a more mild rebuke. I'm not angry, I'm disappointed. Shame on you, Susan Collins. And then I even deleted that, thinking, A, the story stands by itself. And B, I guess it was like, at this point, it was like, I didn't really want to be the man who points out to Susan Collins the discrepancies in the way she regards the threat of sexual assault against her versus the stories of sexual assault against other women. I think women it's not that they have to sort it out by themselves on this. That's not the issue. It's not the case at all. We have to be helpful and supportive of helping in backing them up, and it's all gonna. A lot of the change has to start with men realizing this stuff. But I didn't want to be the one, delivering that message, and I thought, okay, maybe it's best not to insert myself in the middle of this one. As angry as it made me, but I hoped it would make other people angry too, who were more adept at delivering the message. I can't believe it. I mean, I'm astonished, except that we see this sort of hypocrisy all the time, and she's such a prime example in so many instances of being just awful, out of touch, lying hypocrite. It makes me sick, and there are worse out there by far than Susan Collins, but that one really disturbs me. She's been involved in these situations, and she remembers them specifically because of exactly the same sorts of triggers that existed in Christine Blasey Ford's mind, and she still claims, and that's really the problem with it, she still claims not to credit her, not to believe her, still claims to believe, in fact, that it's mistaken identity somehow, which is probably the worst explanation for the entire episode I've ever heard, which is also an amazing thing. Somebody else was observing the other day that wacko, the idiot guy who took the point for Republicans trying to promulgate this ridiculous doppelganger theory out there, everybody laughed at him. Everybody dunked on him, as they say on the internet, and then that very shortly became the mainstream Republican answer to all of this. And they dolled it up a little bit somehow. They cleaned it up a little bit, and it wasn't quite so crazy. They didn't use Zillow posts to try to prove their point, but ultimately, I mean, all of America just watched Susan Collins come out and say, I believe something happened to her. That's signal for women don't abandon me entirely. I believe survivors. I just don't believe that Brett Kavanaugh was the attacker. I don't know. Did you get a real good look at him while he was lying on top of you? I think you probably figured out who he was. Didn't she say one of her good friends was also dating Mark, right? Mark Judge, Kavanaugh's good friend. I think she had a pretty good idea who that was, but that's the line she took, that it had to be somebody else, which is essentially just the same crazy conspiracy theory minus the Zillow posts. And everybody's just walking around like, well, I don't believe she really believes that, but that's what moderate Republicans say. That's become mainstream Republican mantra, is what was conspiracy theory idiocy the week before. Anyway, I hope that, I don't know, I hope you're as disturbed by this as I am, except I don't know what it would lead to. But really, honestly, I'm astonished that Collins appears to have forgotten the incident that happened to her, or she just doesn't care unless it happens to her, or she's just, I don't know what they have on her to make her do the opposite of the right thing. Here she is in a perfect position to have precisely the sort of empathy she should have for other women going through the same thing, and she refuses to have it. She's useless. Thank you. That's all I wanted to say about her. I really needed to rail about her and let you know exactly how disgusting her conclusion here really was. All right. Moving on to some other issues here and cleaning up some of the comments that have been waiting in the wings. Brian Monroe pointing out to us, yes, this is true, right? Even if Nikki Haley did want that Senate seat, she wouldn't need to step down in her current position to get it. And that's actually quite true. She could easily have stayed UN ambassador and had a vacancy opened up in the Senate in South Carolina because Lindsey Graham stepped down to take the Attorney General slot. She could simply do the same then, or she could have been. She certainly could have waited for that to open up. And I don't know whether it's really going to happen. So it seems like a long shot. That doesn't seem, therefore, like a good reason for her having engineered this departure. Okay. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh yes, okay. Well, I think we've got all of our comments in line. Other stories that ought to be occupying your attention today. There are many. Let's continue on with the one of the other themes that Greg brought up about the idea of there being paid protesters anywhere, basically, for the Democrats in particular, but in particular about the Kavanaugh nomination. And I have here a tweet from Greg Sargent, who is in the habit of saying that Paul Waldman is making great points. I very often find that he sells Paul Waldman articles as making great points when they appear in his Plumline column, but let's see if that's the case. In either case, it is, in fact, a very good point. This one, he says, worth contrasting the GOP's paid protester lie with the widespread treatment of the Tea Party as a sacrosanct display of spontaneous, genuine democratic sentiment, which, of course, it was absolutely not. And there, they really were paid protesters. He's linking, though, to a piece by Paul Waldman, not me, and it does, in fact, appear in the Plumline this time, and so not surprising. There's a little bit of self-promotion in a sense, because he's got the Plumline brand, Greg does, even if this piece isn't by him. The real purpose of the paid protester lie. Now we're bumping up against our second break, so all I can do is tell you when the music comes on, which it just did. We've only got 30 seconds to get there. So all I can do for now is tease you with this and say when we come back, in addition to hopefully hearing from Joan McCarter, I will tell you the real purpose of the paid protester lie. You can spend the next minute or so seeing if you can guess what it was, or you could hurry over to the Plumline and read it for yourself and beat me to the punch and recite it into your mirror before I get back in 1 minute from now. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Do you want to know? Did you figure it out? Do you know what the real purpose of the paid protester lie is? Do you know what the paid protester lie is? If you don't, it all starts, well, this round of it starts with a Donald Trump tweet exclaiming, the paid DC protesters are now ready to really protest because they haven't gotten their checks. In other words, they weren't paid, which is sort of a weird way to come around to supporting your argument that they were paid. Screamers in Congress and outside were far too obvious, less professional than anticipated by those paying, or not paying, the bills. Of course, he is an expert in not paying the bills. But here's what Paul Waldman has to say about this one. President Trump, who is now intently focused on the new conservative strategy of pushing the base to the polls by telling it that maniacally violent Democratic mobs are rampaging through the streets and must be stopped, took some me time Tuesday morning for his favorite TV show, Fox and Friends, and this was the result, therefore, or thereafter, including that tweet which I just read you. In case you're wondering what this is in reference to, because you live in the real world, I would add, and you know that there aren't paid protesters out there, Trump was live tweeting the show when Asra Nomani, discussing a piece she wrote for the Wall Street Journal called George Soros's March on Washington, said that in response to her article, people have sent me lots of messages that they're waiting for their check. Do you see what's happening here? Surely, Nomani is not so spectacularly dumb, surely, as to not realize that those messages are sarcastic. In other words, what happened here is they said, George Soros is paying for these protesters. And everybody said, oh yeah, right, exactly. I was protesting there. Where's my check? Ha ha. And they think you're serious. After all, it says here, liberals often say this. Darn, I've been to 5 protests and I haven't gotten a single check from Soros. To mock the idea that Soros pays protesters. But apparently, there was at least one Fox News viewer who thought it was serious. We know the angry mob strategy is about promoting fear and anger, because that's the strategy Trump always returns to in critical moments. And right now, his allies are feverishly working to convince Republican voters that Democrats may literally be coming to kill them. Rand Paul thinks so. The average citizen, if you're on the right, should be concerned and in danger, said Fox's Tomi Lahren, which is amazing because she just said they should be in danger. And they should be. They're not, but they should be. Of course, what she meant is the average citizen, if you're on the right, should be concerned and worried about being in danger. But she's an idiot, and she instead said you should be in danger. And for once, I agree. Yes, it's about creating fear and hatred. But here's another question worth asking. Why is it that when Republicans protest and raise their voices and get angry, we're supposed to regard it as righteous, appropriate, and even worthy of celebration? I would ask, is it the tricorn hats? That could be it. That's how Brett Kavanaugh's display of anger at his hearing was widely greeted, even though he didn't have one of those hats. And remember the Tea Party protests? That's where the hats were. They were often unspeakably ugly and hateful, but they were supposedly a vital manifestation of the feelings of American voters who had to be listened to. Yet, if Democrats protest, and heaven forbid they raise their voices, then they're an angry mob on the verge of violence. They're not people exercising their rights to protest. They're a dire threat to democracy itself. Protesters, you see, have complaints that might need to be taken seriously. An angry mob, on the other hand, has no claims that require attention. Of course, if you go back further to Occupy, right, even Democrats supposedly were questioning, well, what are their demands? They can't be real protesters if they don't have demands. Anyway, an angry mob, on the other hand, has no claims that require attention. It simply needs to be shut down for the sake of public safety. It's different from a paid mob, but in both cases, the purpose of the accusation is to shift focus away from the specific grievances that gave rise to the protest and on to the methods and character of the protest itself. Never mind, I guess if you go back to the first round of the Ferguson protests that evolved into the Black Lives Matter movement, if I have the timing correct on that. Maybe I don't, but I certainly remember the first round of the Ferguson protests where you weren't even allowed to stand still on a sidewalk. That had to be shut down. The idea that every time liberals mount a protest, it's not a genuine expression of Americans' opinions, but a play staged by George Soros is a remarkably persistent fantasy. We hear this literally every single time there's a large liberal protest, whether it's the Women's March or the anti-Kavanaugh demonstrations or any other mass gathering. The protesters were all paid by Soros. In her op-ed, Nomani allows that, quote, while most demonstrators are not paid for their efforts, the protests at the Capitol on Saturday and ones that have included stalking lawmakers inside and outside their offices are organized by groups of which Mr. Soros is an important patron. Unquote. This is a classic bit of misdirection, one that is representative of the kind of contempt conservative elites have for the base of the Republican Party. The Republican Party, yes. Though Nomani herself says she is a Trump-supporting liberal, her blockbuster revelation is that many of the groups active in the Capitol Hill protests, such as the American Civil Liberties Union, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and Planned Parenthood, have gotten support from Soros. Of course they have. He's a very rich man who contributes to liberal organizations, just like a lot of rich people contribute to conservative organizations. And when those groups participate in protests, some of them send their staffers who are experienced at organizing protests to help maximize the political efficacy of the event. The liberal ones do it, and the conservative ones do it. Conservative elites understand perfectly well how mundane that is, but they also quite like to spread the false idea that in any liberal protest, the protesters themselves are being paid to attend by George Soros. The conservative elites don't for a second miss the anti-Semitic undertones in the conspiracy of the Jewish financier acting as international puppet master, but that's fine with them. They look at the rank-and-file conservatives who are the targets of these stories and they say, that's it, lap it up, you rubes. Interestingly enough, the only person in American politics who has actually paid participants to show up at a political event in recent years is, you guessed it, Donald Trump. But ordinarily, paying protesters makes about as much sense as trying to steal an election through voter impersonation. It would be terribly inefficient, and if you did it, you'd probably be found out. Yet, Republican elites keep feeding their base this idea, even though they know how ludicrous it is. Chuck Grassley, the Iowa senator who chairs the committee that was supposed to evaluate Kavanaugh's nomination in a serious manner, recently pretended to believe this as well. Soon afterward, Trump tweeted this: "The very rude elevator screamers are paid professionals only looking to make senators look bad. Don't fall for it. Also, look at all the professionally made identical signs, paid for by Soros and others. They are not signs made in the basement from love." Hashtag troublemakers, by the way. This isn't even the only preposterous conspiracy theory going around right now. Republicans are still spinning fantasies about how Christine Blasey Ford's allegations were either invented or orchestrated in a complex plot dating back months, positing her not as a victim who chose to come forward, which is the truth, but as someone who was manipulated into doing so by scheming Democrats. This isn't something being said by nutballs posting to their YouTube channels. Such whacked-out theories are also being pushed by a United States senator and a prominent conservative radio host. The purpose is the same. If you say Ford was part of a conspiracy, you don't want to say that she's part of a conspiracy. That's awful. But I did it. You no longer need to consider her story. She can be defined as simply illegitimate. Likewise, if the Democrats are merely a mob, you don't have to listen to their arguments for why they would be better for the country than Republicans. As Trump recently said at a rally in his prepared remarks, you don't hand matches to an arsonist and you don't give power to an angry left-wing mob. That's just what they've become. The Democrats have become too extreme and too dangerous to govern. We cannot overstate how important this argument that Democrats are fundamentally illegitimate in every aspect of their participation is becoming to the GOP. That's because Republicans are facing long-term crisis. The president was elected by a minority of the voters, and senators elected by a minority of the voters just confirmed a Supreme Court nominee who is supported by a minority and will swing the court dramatically to the right in opposition to the desires of most Americans. And it is entirely possible that Republicans could lose the popular vote this fall and still hold on to both houses of Congress. Never before has one party been this unpopular and had this much power. So in order to sustain its own legitimacy, it must define the other party as illegitimate now, no matter how many Americans support it, not just in its hopes to govern, but in everything it does. There we reach the end of the article, and a good reminder, by the way, this whole idea of portraying Democrats generally as this unruly mob, this uncontrollable mob, also came up in Twitter this morning. Michael Grunwald making a good observation. He is senior writer for Politico magazine, pointing out Trump is the one. Trump borrowed $2 trillion to cut taxes for the rich, tried to strip health care from 20 million Americans, trying again, I guess today, rejected the global consensus on climate change, called LeBron James dumb, and pardoned Joe Arpaio. And he's got the media discussing whether Democrats are too radical. That is pretty amazing. I guess you got to hand it to him there in terms of his ability to manipulate the media. It's working pretty good, I must say. All right. Well, I just thought I would share that one with you. By the way, I guess another thing out there looming and worth mentioning, although I won't dive into it in full, perhaps I can just share the article with you. And this tweet, which sums things up nicely. Oh, it's gone now. So now I've got real questions. If the tweet's gone, that also, well, that wasn't a very smart idea because, of course, I put the tweet aside so that I could read the article that was linked in it, and now it's gone. Maybe I can find the tweeter, and maybe they changed slightly the content of what they had to say. Let me, how am I going to find this person and this tweet? It was, but it was an observation based on a ProPublica article about Sheldon Adelson and his increasing ability to essentially just ask whatever he wants from Trump and be able to get it too. That's the really startling part. And where is this? The tweet's been eliminated. Let's see. Eric Umansky made this observation. And let me see if we can find the Twitter account and see whether it's just gone, in which case we have to worry about the veracity of the tweet, or whether it has simply been updated. Here we have found the tweeter here. Let's see. He says, fixing the tweet. FYI, I'm fixing this tweet. Okay. Well, that was actually kind of the heart of the tweet, too. Well, the original tweet was an example of how Washington works now. And then it said, mega donor Sheldon Adelson wants Japan to legalize gambling. He wants a casino there. Adelson told Trump that, and then Trump raised it with Japanese Prime Minister Abe at Mar-a-Lago, two sources told us. And then pointing to the ProPublica piece. And, are we able to, that was the screenshot of it. So I can open up the piece and take a look. Now I'm considering taking a look at that long term, but perhaps later on. Then the note, FYI, I'm fixing this tweet. We don't know that Adelson told Trump about his desire for a casino in Japan. What we know is that they dined together shortly before, sources tell us, Trump raised Adelson's bid to Abe. Trump raised it, quote, out of the blue. So, but that's a pretty major link in the chain that they put together. Adelson wants Japan to legalize gambling. He wants a casino there. Adelson told Trump that. Trump raises it with the Japanese Prime Minister at Mar-a-Lago. But the missing piece here, now I guess we would have to say, Adelson wants Japan to legalize gambling. He wants a casino there. He may or may not have told Trump that, but he did have dinner with him before Abe arrived. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he's telling Prime Minister Abe that they need to change all of Japan's laws and legalize gambling there for reasons. And apparently the Prime Minister was a little bit shocked and taken aback by the brazenness of the whole thing. But, well, that's Trump for you. And it didn't stop him from smiling through the appearance and playing golf with him and then hosting him later on in Japan either. But as all ProPublica pieces are, this one is pretty lengthy. So perhaps we'll leave it for you to read on your own time instead. And move on to a couple other bits and pieces still hanging out there. This is a good one. I thought, I always think I'm done with Kavanaugh, but I don't know. I don't think so. I think that's just something that's going to linger for an awfully long time and with good reason. So I offer you this. Linda Fairstein, a writer for the Daily News, has, I think, this important summing up of the way Republicans viewed Christine Blasey Ford's testimony. The corroboration dodge. Christine Blasey Ford's allegation is credible and consistent. No one else needs to remember. That's the big dodge of these days. No corroborating evidence. And of course, we pointed out to you, there's plenty of corroborating evidence. You guys just don't understand what your terminology that you're using means. People gave all kinds of corroborating evidence. She offered plenty of corroborating evidence herself. You just think, well, there's no confession here. There's no ironclad evidence, and that's a very different thing. But it's worth asking, where does this corroboration idea even come from? And I think people probably just thought, generally speaking, well, you want corroborating evidence in any situation, and that's only part of the answer. This was a very interesting exploration of this, and it's not even all that long. Mitch McConnell, and a cohort of fellow Republican senators announced their plans to vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh for a seat on the Supreme Court despite the compelling statement of Christine Blasey Ford, calling her testimony an uncorroborated accusation. As a former sex crimes prosecutor, the use of that inappropriate term is particularly offensive to me, representing archaic legal views that were in place in America for more than a century and which prevented the overwhelming number of victims of sexual assault from ever being allowed their day in court. You should hear this. What was the basis for the need to corroborate a rape victim's word when no other crime in the penal law imposed such an absurd requirement on accusers? How did that happen? Did you realize that that was the case? If you say somebody robs you, you don't need corroborating evidence from other people testifying that the defendant was in the area at that time or had discussed robbing people in the past. That's just not, I mean, it's helpful, but it's not necessary. You don't say, well, this is an uncorroborated allegation of robbery. It doesn't happen. How did this get in the consciousness of America? How did it get, in fact, in the law? Well, there's an answer. It was the legacy of a British jurist, Sir Matthew Hale, Lord Chief Justice of the King's Bench in the 17th century, who wrote an opinion which held that the testimony of a woman, this is the 17th century, the testimony of a woman reporting rape must be examined with more caution than in any other category of offense. Did you realize that this had ever been enunciated and enunciated in a foreign court at that? Now, we borrow a lot of our law from English common law, but, Republicans hate foreign law. Yes, and you would think they would especially hate, because they're such patriots, colonial era British law, but apparently not. And it stuck with us, and it stayed with us here in our American law for a very long time. In 1970, in fact, she points out a story here, 2 years before I came to the practice of law and joined the office of the New York County District Attorney, more than 1,000 men were arrested for sexual assault in the 5 boroughs of this city. Remember, she's writing in the New York Daily News. Yet only 18 of them were tried and convicted. 1,000 arrested, 18 tried and convicted. Even the most honest among the accusers, think here of your daughters or mothers or sisters or friends, were denied access to the courtroom because their cases lacked the 3 elements of corroboration codified in our laws. Identification of the attacker. In this, a crime, by the way, that is rarely witnessed by anyone. The sexual nature of the attack, long before we had evidence collection kits and the science of DNA, and proof of the force that had been used, making severe injury a, quote, good thing for a rape victim to experience if she wanted her case to go to trial. Think about that. I mean, I don't need to remind you about that, but honestly, I met these women every day of the week. My colleagues and I, and the great women and men of the NYPD, investigated these cases. Then we read the law of this state to each accuser who had been courageous enough to come forward to seek justice, apologized for the fundamental unfairness of the legislation, and told them that it prevented us from taking their cases to trial, no matter how much we believed them. We weren't losing verdicts before juries. We simply weren't allowed to give rape victims a chance to enter the courtroom. Well, that changed, thankfully, in the mid-1970s. In every state in this country that still had the ancient rule embedded in its laws, it was recognized then, as now still, that sexual assault is the most underreported crime in the penal law. Every prosecutor knew that a victim of robbery or assault or car theft didn't need an eyewitness to testify at trial. We handled homicides, too. That could proceed to conviction on circumstantial evidence alone, without any person who had observed the fatal act. For at least 4 decades, the rise of special victims units in police departments and prosecutors' offices everywhere has ensured a better opportunity for survivors to be met by experienced professionals who are trained to look for evidence that supports their claims. But the law is clear. The word of a woman is legally sufficient, with no other evidence required to take her accuser to trial. That doesn't mean the people will secure a conviction, but it does mean the corroboration rule is bogus. Paramount in assessing a claim is the credibility of the accuser herself. And few of us have heard any witness more credible than Ford. Before the Judiciary Committee and the viewing public, she was candid. She has never wavered in her description of the attack. She named the people who were present at the gathering, people who were a part of Kavanaugh's social circle that summer, and that's corroborating evidence all by itself, which is not something that she would otherwise have known. Key details of her account, including her inclusion of a third person during the attack itself, are consistent with prior statements made years earlier to her therapists. These are not exterior corroboration, as McConnell means it, but to any prosecutor honestly assessing the strength of a victim's claim, they are powerful indicators of believability. Whether any of the other witnesses Ford mentioned as present at the gathering remember it or not is irrelevant, since they had no knowledge of what occurred at the top of the staircase, either as witnesses to the sexual assault or reports from Ford herself. The evening would have had no special meaning for any of them, and it makes no sense at all that she would have made her outcry to friends of her assailant. Sir Matthew Hale was quoted frequently in legal opinions about rape until the 1970s, when we took the step to eliminate his centuries-old view of the value of the word of a woman. The only legal opinion I could find from him cited since rape reform legislation passed in this country was a 1993 decision in England. So there's nothing in this country. In England, Regina versus Kingston. The court affirmed a conviction in that case, relying on the wisdom of Hale in ruling that drunkenness is not a defense to a crime of intent. Perhaps that fact would be of more use to the senators as they prepare to vote. Well, apparently it was of no use to the senators as they prepare to vote, because they were voting, not considering the evidence as a jury, and it really didn't matter to them one way or the other whether they were right or wrong. They simply wanted a certain outcome and were willing to take it by virtue of having the votes. Anyway, a very interesting view of things and a good reminder that for most of our history, through, the accident of having inherited English common law, a 17th century, a decision from the 1600s by a British judge stood for, I don't know when it fell in the 17th century, but throughout the 1700s, 1800s, and most of the 1900s, at least 250 years or more, I guess so 270 or more, but somewhere between 270 and 300 something years old was this concept that rape was the one crime that you couldn't simply take the victim's word for it happening. That's amazing. That's astounding in its own right. And of course, we know probably what that means, which is that Hale was probably at the time, I wonder whether that was considered like radical and progressive, like there was such a thing as rape. And they probably weren't entirely sure beforehand, but that's when the standard was set. In the 1600s, at some point, they said, rape, maybe it is, maybe it isn't rape. You can't just take the word of the woman for it, because after all, if he didn't beat her, or if she doesn't know who the attacker was, how can we really convict somebody on something like that? And again, you didn't have to know who robbed you. You would only have to be able to identify the person by face or some other methodology would be fine, so long as you made an in-court identification of the person you believed to have done it. But apparently that didn't work for rape. And gee whiz, we wonder why. All right, we really don't. It's time for our third break here. And we can use a little music to play us out here. I wonder why that happens. Every time the third break comes up, I have to hit the unpause button in soundboard. We'll never figure that out. One of the production mysteries here. All right. We'll return with yet more stories. I am not certain whether we'll be able to. Well, maybe we'll get a late dash in from Joan. Perhaps not. We'll see what's going on with that healthcare vote. Maybe we can update you on it. Plenty of stories, though. Never at a loss for things to share with you in our third segment. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support.
Thanks.
We can do that right now. As a matter of fact, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. Joan McCarter is with us, hustling in at the in our final segment. I said the third, but apparently we have 4 segments. I'm reminded of my own show and how it works. Okay, terrific. And I know, let's see. So you were distracted a bit today. Apparently the USA Today op-ed allegedly from Trump on your plate for dissection this morning. But I guess also in hearing the story of Susan Collins on the elevator. So did you have to like go in a basement room and scream or anything?
I just screamed on Twitter.
Oh, okay, that's allowed.
And to myself in my head, I've been doing a lot of that.
Sure.
Over Susan Collins in the past few weeks.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like she's a big disappointment or anything. It's just annoying that you could be that traitorous. You know, I guess I can't be the one to call her a traitor. If we're going to say she's a traitor to women, I guess women have to do that. But
she's a traitor to women.
I think you're right. Thank you for saying that. Because it's not fair for me to... I can't tell you who's a traitor to women. I can hint strongly. I believe you. But that's it, I think.
And I don't know what's more infuriating. The fact that this was in the bag the whole time, that she had promised McConnell months ago that she was going to vote yes on Kavanaugh, that she probably did, in fact, greenlight him before he was even nominated.
Yeah.
And pretended for all these weeks. That's as infuriating as her final vote, really.
Yeah. Now I wish somebody had this article on hand when she was making her speech about how, well, I believe her. It just must have been someone in a Kavanaugh suit. I guess. Yeah. Like what?
Bitch.
Worst possible excuse for the whole thing. And then, then to find out.
The worst possible excuse, the most ridiculous possible, the doppelganger. Remember how everybody laughed about Ed Whalen and his doppelganger?
Yes.
That became their talking point.
That is the most amazing part of it, that everybody laughed at. Even Republicans pointed and laughed and said that's just stupid. And then they said, we'll just take Ed Whalen's name off of it and leave the Zillow part out, and it's credible.
Right.
That is amazing. And then... yeah. Oh, I found her credible. I think she's mistaken. She's just misremembering some details of the story. Well, didn't you have a story like that? And wasn't the laughter the triggering part that cemented it?
Triggered your memory? Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. But I'm Susan Collins and you're not. So my vote is yes. Oh.
Susan Collins, whose future opponent has, I think, $4 million now in the bag.
Yeah. Well,
if Susan Collins is going to run again.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
She
it's
has
a big question.
speaking of healthcare and the Donald Trump op-ed, she has another chance to redeem herself probably as early as today, if she's going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is voting with Senate Democrats, all 49 of whom have signed on to the discharge petition to overturn the Trump administration's new rule on those short-term health care plans.
Wow. Okay.
That are not short-term anymore and don't have to cover people with pre-existing conditions. Hey.
Not short-term and not health care. But other than that...
Not short-term, not health care. It's short-term plans that were allowed under Obamacare for a short term, for like 3 months maximum, for people who were in a position of like changing jobs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when you start a new job and your health insurance doesn't kick in immediately,
Yeah.
this was just sort of catastrophic just to bridge the gap between having real coverage.
Yeah.
But Trump is expanding their sale and expanding the length of time that they can last. In some cases, up to 3 years.
That's not very short.
No, that's not very short. And it would do a lot of horrible things for people who don't really research it and end up buying these because they're so much cheaper, then get sick. Oops, you're out of luck.
Yeah.
But for the rest of the population buying individual coverage, having all of these people who are healthy decide to pay for these cheap plans instead and come out of the individual insurance market raises premiums for those people who have to have the coverage. So again, death spiral, all of the stuff that we foresaw happening with Obamacare, Trump is trying to force to happen. And here's Susan Collins going all the way back to that tax fight. And when she was making Mitch McConnell promise her that they would have votes in the Senate to protect Obamacare and to protect people with pre-existing conditions.
Yes.
And he didn't. And she caved and gave him her Trump care vote anyway. I mean, her tax bill vote anyway. Well, now here's her chance to redeem herself.
Well, yeah, we'll see whether that's
She
enough. She won't anyway, but even if she
won't.
did, I don't think that would erase what happened. But
it would not erase what happened
No, I
because
think-
this is the Supreme Court.
sort of irredeemable now. Well, so I don't know. I mean, what? It's tough to move on to anything else. Everything. Well, I guess everything she ever does is now going to be tangled up in what she ended up doing in
It is.
the Kavanaugh nomination.
And I
It's
want to get back to the
inescapable.
part. None of this from her was a surprise. None of this was
No.
something that she actually ended up agonizing over. And it's pretty clear because we've got Mitch McConnell coming out and saying, "Oh, Collins is our top priority for protecting in 2020."
Mm-hmm.
And then at the same time on Murkowski saying Murkowski's one of our greats. She's fine in Alaska. We don't have to worry about her in Alaska. She won in 2010 on a write-in.
Mm-hmm.
She's golden. So it's clear that from the outset, McConnell gave Murkowski permission to vote no on Kavanaugh because he had Collins voting yes.
Yeah. Well, that tarnishes that a little bit as well. I had a feeling, of course, that was the case, and neither of them
It
are
was
really to be
pretty
trusted.
obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sad, but true. Okay. I mean, I don't know if there's any way to move on from all of that. But
There's a way to move on from all of that. And, one of the ways for Collins is to vote with Democrats on this.
I
And-
guess that's true.
And show that independence. Right?
Yeah.
Right? She has so much independence.
Yes. Well, man. We'll see what she can muster, I suppose. But well, yeah. I mean, she got a good dot. I wonder, do they compete or coordinate as between them? Like, who's gonna, which one of us is going to grab the free pass.
I think
curious.
they have to coordinate.
How did she get stuck with this one? I mean, she may have said, I'm not running anymore, so I'll take it. I'll take the hit and be the yes vote.
Possibly.
I guess. Meanwhile,
or, they weighed who had the most, who was in the least danger of voting no, and that would be Murkowski. Who would it be most dangerous to vote yes for? Murkowski, because of the Alaska Natives.
Yeah.
So who is it most important to give the pass to? Murkowski.
I guess so.
That's my guess anyway.
That's good strategy, I suppose. It's not the way people
Which reminds you that, even though she was very principled on this and did the right thing, she got a pass on it.
Yes.
So Murkowski's still a Republican.
Freebie votes are...
get their hopes up too high about her.
Right. Yeah, not likely that she'd be changing. Although, I mean, having had to run as a independent write-in at some point, you'd think it would be like, well, maybe this party isn't for you. And already there's Sarah Palin is like apparently licking her chops at running against her in a primary, which I don't know exactly how ridiculous that really is.
I think that's probably really ridiculous. But at the same time, didn't Sarah Palin make a big deal a few weeks ago about leaving Alaska?
I don't know. Maybe.
She was moving. She was going somewhere else. So I don't know.
Well, all right. I can believe it.
Please, Sarah Palin, take on Lisa Murkowski. I would like to see that one.
It would be interesting to watch, and hopefully, I mean, it would be dangerous because there's every chance that, like last time, the radical kook ends up winning the Republican primary, and I wouldn't want to roll the independent write-in dice again necessarily. Although in any state you're going to do it, I suppose, low population Alaska is the place to do it, and wouldn't hurt if, like, your dad had been governor and you, all that.
And you already taught enough people how to write your name.
Right. Yeah, that's
to
true.
Win.
You already have the pencil. So.
And she's not up till 2022.
That's a while, too.
Yeah.
You could literally, tell everyone in Alaska between now and then. I mean, not in person, because you'd have to fly there to each of their houses, and that's tough. But you can certainly
Whereas Colin's threat comes from the right. It comes from the crazy LePage people.
Yeah.
If not LePage
win.
himself.
That's true. They have a better record of prevailing in Maine, even though it's only because of vote splitting. But and that apparently not as much of a threat this time around, since they have their instant runoff, or they're not. It's not instant, I guess, but
right.
Or is it? Did they use IRV there, or did they use some other runoff?
No, it's IRV.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, we love our things to be instant. Just add hot water, and you get a better governor
or senator.
Yeah, fantastic.
It'd be hard.
Good for you.
Although I don't know, maybe Maine deserves it for being fooled by both of them for all these years. Sorry, all my friends in Maine.
Yes, well, they can redeem
right now
themselves.
I'm bitter about things.
Yeah, well, I think we can all give you some room for that. All right, let's see. What other
and bitter because the first two things that the Supreme Court did with Kavanaugh on it.
Yes.
Not take up a challenge to one of Kavanaugh's rulings on environmental, on something to do with gas.
I see.
So they refused to hear that, and Kavanaugh's district court, D.C. Circuit Court ruling stands.
Okay.
And they are allowing a voter suppression tool in North Dakota. They lifted a stay on a voter suppression tool that North Dakota has been using against Native Americans.
Yeah, this was a weird one. I saw a lot of discussion about it in detail all of a sudden yesterday. I mean, I'm sure it's been out there, and I have paid no attention to it because I'm not in North Dakota. But
Heidi Heitkamp is running for re-election in North Dakota this fall, and now Native Americans will not be able to use to register to vote on Election Day using proof of identity that doesn't include something with their residential street address on it.
Yes.
Well, guess what? On a lot of reservations and a lot of rural areas, there aren't residential street addresses. These people have P.O. boxes.
Yeah. That's normal. Lots of people have that, reservation or otherwise.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
In a state like North Dakota that's
Sure.
extremely rural.
There's you need my street address? I don't have a street.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't have a street growing up.
No?
I had a 2-line address.
That's interesting. So just, was it a P.O. box or some other sort of thing?
Just my name, Corral, Idaho, 83322.
Okay. And that's all it took. They knew what to do with it. Okay.
Of course, I wasn't voting then, but my parents were,
that's true.
and that was fine.
Yes. Well, it happens at all ends of the spectrum. If you send a letter to England and you just write Elizabeth, Buckingham Palace, it gets
It would
there.
get there.
Street address, yes. I don't know the number, actually. Does anyone know? We have 1600 on Pennsylvania Avenue. That's got a number. What's the number for Buckingham Palace? I don't know. She must be a voter
Are
fraud.
you comparing me to the Queen of England?
Would you like that?
This was very weird.
It is. Okay, then no. Do you like tea? That's
As a
really
matter
all
of
that's
fact.
necessary. Okay, there you go. This is done. She's very powerful, very wealthy. You might like it, but you know,
Yeah.
you're American.
I could be
and,
queen.
As a
I could be
patriot,
queen.
you want to remain loyal to the United States. I understand. Well, it's getting harder each day.
It is getting harder
I must
each
say.
day. Greg already talked about the Trump op-ed, right?
To some extent.
Did we talk about why in the hell USA Today is publishing stuff that has been debunked time and time and time and time again? Do they have to
Why?
just because he's the president?
That was all we were able to come up with. Is that, people do dumb things for the president when they ask just because. Although
If Nancy Pelosi offered an op-ed to USA Today saying we have a dangerous, perhaps authoritarian president who wants to destroy our Constitution, would they allow that to be published?
I wonder. Probably not without counterpoint.
I mean, he says the
she's a
New
commie.
Democrats are radical socialists who
That
want
is
to
true.
model Americans' economy after Venezuela. He says that.
Yeah, he loves. He did. He said that at one of his rallies the other day. The lies are getting more
He
ridiculous.
says that in this op-ed.
Oh, I
they
didn't
want
why?
border socialism.
But it's about health care. Is that what does Venezuela have terrific health care?
I don't believe so, but Medicare for all will make us just like Venezuela. Oh, and open borders.
Oh, yes, right. That's the latest of his. I think I talked about this the other day. Is that also in the op-ed, open borders? Or no?
Yes.
What
Yes.
is this? Why? What would he be saying this for? It doesn't have anything to do with anything.
It has nothing to do with anything. But here's his thesis. If Democrats win control of Congress this November, we'll come dangerously closer to socialism in America, which is Venezuela. Government-run healthcare is just the beginning.
Sure.
Democrats are also pushing massive government control of education, private sector businesses, and other major sectors of the U.S. economy. Proof?
Oh.
We
Well, you
don't-
don't need corroborating evidence, do you?
Oh, no. But then we get into abolishing ICE, which means millions more would cross our borders illegally and take advantage of health care paid for by American taxpayers.
I see.
I did.
Well, that's an old trope, but okay. At least that sort of kind of has something to do with the topic, allegedly, of the op-ed, if that's what it is.
And Medicare for all. Oh, and we get...
Yeah.
Remember the $700 billion that Democrats took from Medicare to pay for Obamacare?
I remember that story.
2012, Mitt Romney, the big lie of the 2012 election.
Yes.
It's now $800 billion in Trump's op-ed.
That's just That's just so Trump. That's hilarious, except, of course, it's sad and demented. But also hilarious, that's just his habit. I know Daniel Dale keeps pointing out every time he brings up, like, for instance, the U.S. Steel is opening up plants, he just ups the number. They're opening zero plants. But he's used that now in 8 or 9 rally speeches, so it's up from 0 to 8 or 9. He just adds one. Every time somebody says, that's a lie, they're not opening any, he increases the number.
Yeah.
And no one stops it. No one says anything. People will take his op-eds and publish them.
And publish them
as a matter of fact.
As if they weren't completely debunked over and over and over again. What is USA Today's responsibility here?
Publishing every day.
At least it would be to present a fact check next to the op-ed.
Tomorrow. Maybe.
Maybe we can push back enough that
we're putting that in
that.
USA Tomorrow. Today we're printing the lies. USA Tomorrow has the corrections. Yeah, that's bizarre. I hadn't even really realized. I knew that they were pushing a healthcare bill, and I knew that they've been lying about essentially the effects of the ideas of Medicaid for all, and yes, please.
Sorry,
this is what you're here for.
It is protecting Medicare. He also, in the same paragraph, talks about how he is offering protections for people with pre-existing conditions. Well, as a candidate, he promised he would do that, and he's still doing that. He's suing to take them away.
Yes. It's upside down and backwards, and has extraneous claims that are just blatant lies. But
and by the way, Democrats today in the Senate are forcing a vote on a bill that would indeed protect people with pre-existing conditions, and he has threatened to veto that bill.
Yeah, man, and it's like nobody even looks or cares. I guess it's just one of those things that, as president, you get to do, or maybe they just I don't know what it is. People expect politicians to lie. So it's okay.
People expect Trump to lie.
I guess that's the case. I guess that's part of the explanation for why, for instance, I've seen lots of comments to this effect in the last day or so, that the big expose, the New York Times masterpiece on his taxes is just like everybody sees it
just
and says,
faded away.
I know, he cheats on his taxes. That's why he didn't show us their taxes.
Yeah. When the Mueller report comes out, he collaborated with Russia. Oh, everybody knew that already.
Yeah, but he said there was no collaboration. Yeah, but we knew there was, and here it is.
Oh, well.
Yeah, that's exciting. I hope that's not the case, but
As do I.
I don't know what to think of it. I am puzzled by why no one... I mean, there were a couple of explanations offered, tax law, boring, articles too long...
Kavanaugh,
yes, that's
distracting
true.
Everybody.
Yes,
with the angry mobs.
Right. I guess so. I mean, I guess any of those things could explain it. It's disappointing, is all I can say. But, wow, it's a rough couple of weeks here. At least, though, we're finding out that the stories of Kavanaugh rallying Republican enthusiasm, at least we get to find out, are not true well in advance of the election.
They're not true well in advance of the election, and I'm glad to see that there is pushback there.
Yeah, well, that's good. I wouldn't mind seeing it elsewhere. All right, so I mean, what else is on the plate for the day? Is this the last? This is the final act of the Senate for the year. I don't even know what else would be coming.
Well, no.
Okay.
McConnell wants to keep pushing more judges. He wants to keep them in through the rest of October and keep pushing judges. Which, after today's vote, I think Schumer has to just shut down.
Yeah.
We can talk about procedure a little bit. No more unanimous consent. Let his senators be off running where they need to run and helping each other where they need to run by refusing to give a unanimous consent and drawing things out as long as possible. McConnell
Also-
has the option, which he used during the Kavanaugh proceedings, to not actually adjourn Congress, the Senate,
Okay.
to keep them in recess so that we have one Senate day that lasts like a week.
Oh, yeah, okay.
He did that for Kavanaugh. It remained Wednesday in the Senate until Saturday.
One of their magic tricks.
One of the magic tricks.
Yeah, is that okay? Well, so it's something he could
That
do
that
again?
would that allowed him to switch between executive and legislative session without asking for unanimous consent.
Yes, okay.
Because it's the Senate.
Right. They have all sorts of fun things that they can do this way. All right. Let's see. Other.
But yeah, more judges.
Yeah.
He's just shoving them down our throats.
I guess so. It's not enough for them. And any in particular on the radar is more egregious than others? They may all be all equally
the
terrible.
potential replacement for Kavanaugh.
Of
And I
course.
know that Rebecca on our staff is looking into that. Yeah, because moving him up from the second most important court in the land means that there's a vacancy now.
Yes. Right.
The second most important court in the land.
Yeah, and he should never have been there either. But okay. Actually, how many of the current justices are D.C. Circuit alums now?
Good question.
Yeah. It's almost become like automatic, and I guess maybe that contributed to his feeling of entitlement to the job. I have been here on the D.C. Circuit. Everyone knows that everybody, except for one guy,
Merrick Garland.
everybody except that guy gets to move up. They don't, of course, but it is odd, and I'm also curious, like when. The answer is never. When would Republicans who are whose stock and trade is railing against Washington D.C. and the real America is out here? Well, I don't know when the last have they had two nominations in a row at any point that didn't include the D.C. circuit, that pulled from another circuit somewhere, but not keen on doing that. Yes.
This just reminded me, speaking of Merrick Garland, we have a supposed disagreement between the Judiciary Committee and Mitch McConnell on whether or not a nominee in 2020 would get a hearing.
Yeah.
McConnell says he's perfectly open to it. Grassley and Graham, who apparently thinks for some reason he's going to be in control of the Judiciary Committee in 2020.
All righty.
Say, nope, we wouldn't do that. We would respect the Biden rule. I guess they would call it.
That's what
the
they tried to
Garland
call it.
rule. Who knows what they're going to call it?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not certain what they're going to term it, but yeah, I guess they didn't get the memo originally that that McConnell was going to say no, it's fine, it's okay to show. Or okay to bring a judge in an election year as long as the president and the Senate are of the same party, right? Wasn't that basically his codicil to this rule? It's no longer okay. Yeah. So in other words, whatever he needs to get what he wants is the rule, and they should just say it that way. It's a lot easier. And
it's a lot easier.
Okay. So I guess we don't really have to wait and see what does the Judiciary Committee do in resolving this dilemma. They do.
No, we don't.
McConnell
It's
thing.
Mitch McConnell. They do whatever McConnell wants.
But I thought you said that. Yeah. Well, I didn't say it, and there's no corroborating evidence.
Democrats are in control of the Judiciary Committee. It could happen.
I guess that's true too. That could be the case, and we'll hope for that one. And I'd rather have that and never find out how they resolve the differences between them. That would be much easier. I'd like to.
Much easier.
Okay. Well, all right. We got to wrap it up here. So thank you, though, for coming by and letting us know what's coming up and what you've been working on. Appreciate it. I know they lean on you pretty hard there sometimes.
Sometimes.
Okay. Wow. That was a pregnant pause. My goodness. Okay, well, I won't tell if you don't, and I think you're entitled to vent occasionally, and I'm glad you did it here today. Thanks for coming by, and we'll try it again next week. Okay, great. Thanks very much. And Joan McCarter, everyone on her way out through. I know they make you get back to the salt mines, Joan. Our senior political writer, able to come in for just a few minutes at the end of the show. Always a redeeming factor for the end of a long show. I appreciate it. And time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. He'll be rounding up all those other stories that I kept threatening to bring you and didn't. Or maybe, just maybe, another angle on something I already did. Let's see. Well, look at this. What if they gave an election and no one from UC Irvine eating In-N-Out burgers cared to vote? Yeah, that was an infuriating little video clip. If you don't know what we're talking about, stay tuned to pick up on that one. House GOP, believe it or not, smears military veterans as anti-American in its new attack ads. That sounds like a mistake, but they'll never pay for it. ICE released hundreds of asylum seekers on the U.S. border with nowhere to go. And the Ford Motor Company is set to lay off 24,000 workers as a result of Trump's trade war. Hooray! Tired of winning yet?
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Also on tap in his show, more discussion of how the Supreme Court just imperiled Heidi Heitkamp's re-election bid in North Dakota by making it even more difficult to vote. And the main office of the Russian troll factory, responsible for the pro-Trump 2016 election meddling, is torched by an arsonist. You don't give matches to an arsonist, it was once said. We'll see you tomorrow.